This slide and the next slide really look at some of the mechanisms by which steroids and non-steroids work. And this also, to bring to your attention, again, includes the thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, thyroxine and triiodothyronine. Even though they're not cholesterol-based, so they're not a steroid, they act like the steroids do. And as such, neither group requires a membrane cell receptor, as this cartoon shows you. The hormone is released, it moves out of the blood to the target cell, just a nice generic cell here, and it is taken into the cell without the use of a membrane receptor. And so the non-steroids won't enter the cell. They will actually bind at the surface, we'll see in a second, and they'll cause something to happen. But again, the diffuses through the plasma membrane, as it shows you, right? And binds often with some receptor inside the cytoplasm. These are then taken into the nucleus, right? Bind to specific areas on the DNA, and so they initiate or inhibit gene expression. So they change, they allow transcription to take place and translation. So we say here protein synthesis has changed. And I say, what proteins might this target cell make? Well, it makes a variety of enzymes. It makes transport proteins like aquaporins. It even can make more hormone receptors. So this lipid-soluble steroid hormone could get a non-steroid hormones receptor made on this cell if needed. All right. And I said here, you need to realize that this hormone can turn on or off gene expression. So it's a powerful stimulus or inhibitor, right? But a powerful motivator for change in the body, right? So a non-steroid would have to have a cell membrane, as shown in this cartoon. So here's our water-soluble hormones, these non-steroids, based on proteins, hormones, and peptides. Would leave the blood, because it's an endocrine hormone, right? Delivered in the blood, leave it. And they are insoluble, so they have to bind to they can't pass through the membrane, in other words. Chemically, they bind to a receptor. So the target cells for this non-steroids have to have a receptor in their membrane, all right? And then it goes on to talk about, and this is a pretty complicated signaling process, so it's not, again, something I want to test you guys on. But it will, this hormone, again, never enters a cell. Its binding here with the receptor causes change, right? So this walks through the cascade of events from G proteins to cyclic AMP activation and so forth. And then finally ends with this phosphorylation of a protein, which means that it does something different. It changes, it becomes activated, as we see here, right? So what I need you to know, again, is that if you're a non-steroid hormone, right, in other words, not based on cholesterol and not the thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, you cannot, right, directly affect gene transcription. You can't directly affect what goes on because you don't enter into the cell, right? So you still get some of the same changes in the end as the steroids would, right? You can alter the permeability of the cell, the activity of an enzyme, as I show you in this circumstance. It can cause the cells to secrete or even move. But again, the difference being that you can't enter the cell, and so what you cause to happen in your target is really an indirect. All right. So this simple cartoon looks at this idea of hormones in general and how they're regulated. All right. So as I said in the beginning, and you learned way back in chapter 1 of AMP1, is you have this negative feedback, this idea that you've got to balance a lot of things. And the things you have to balance don't just include what the hormones are going to control, but it also includes the hormones themselves, right? So it says here again, you've got to balance their production and destruction. So here we've got an idea, they're starting off with, there's low blood concentrations of glucocorticoids. So hypothalamus has the sensors for this. Glucocorticoids are like your cortisol, all right? So there's an imbalance in the amount of cortisol, so that's going to trigger a hormone release, all right? So it's gone down, we want to bring it up. So here we've got the hypothalamus, right? This is causing the hypothalamus to tell the anterior pituitary to start through CRH to start making adrenocorticotropic hormone, right? So this is what was happening right here. It's dumped in the blood, circulates through, and influences the adrenal cortex. So blood concentration of glucocorticoids increase because cause and effect. So they start to rise, right? So cortisol levels are going up in the blood, and this rise then has, right, circulates back through the hypothalamus and stops its production. Okay, so we corrected it here, and we don't want to keep it going up. So that's the idea you're seeing here. And I say here that generally negative feedback is when you have enough, you stop. So you want it balanced just right. So the degradation of these hormones is continuous, as well as some of the production is. So hormones are degraded in the liver and excreted by the kidneys. So they'll only have an effect as long as they're around. And that's one of the reasons why, again, on the first table, we compare the endocrine and the nervous system. Well, the endocrine has a longer effect because to stop being having some influence, right, on its target, we have to destroy the hormone, right? In the nervous system, all you did is you used an enzyme like acetylcholinesterase, and got rid of acetylcholine, or you, right, took the neurotransmitter back up. You brought it back into a neuron or a neuroglia cell, and so as long as it wasn't around, there was no effect. Right? So now, we really, this is the last kind of generalized idea about the introduction to the endocrine system. And this is, look, everything we're going to talk about, all the different hormones, 20 or so hormones that we're going to go through, they're going to have ways in which, or processes in which they become stimulated, and they're going to be released, right? So how do they get released? How do we start, making and secreting, thyroxine and calcitonin and estrogen and progesterone and so forth? So all of these, no matter what we talk about, are going to fall into one of three categories shown here, right? So it's either going to be something changes in the blood, and that means, again, ions like sodium, potassium, calcium, nutrients like glucose, right? So something changes in the blood and the endocrine tissue responds. And this is the way, right, again, the parathyroid hormone works, some of the hormones of the adrenal cortex, the pancreas. This is their general, and even ADH from the hypothalamus based on water. Okay? Hormonal stimuli. So if you aren't produced and secreted because of a change in something in the blood, well, what about changes in hormone levels? And again, we track these back to the hypothalamus. So very similar to the previous slide here, where we said the hypothalamus was CRH, and CRH is a great example of its influence on ACTH, right? So if the hypothalamus is causing the gland, like in the last example, the anterior pituitary, to become active and secrete more of some hormone, then we say it's hormonal stimuli, right? So hormone levels change, and this causes a different endocrine gland to secrete a hormone. So you can pretty much put all the anterior pituitary hormones into this category. You can then put the thyroid hormone, thyroxine and triiodothyronine, into this category. You can put cortisol, the glucocorticoids, into this category, right? And ultimately, estrogen, progesterone into this category, all right? And then last category of how when we're talking about how do we get the endocrine gland to make its hormone, the last category of how we get them to do that is the neural stimuli. And really this should be the autonomic nervous system stimuli, because that's what happens. And the only example of this is epinephrine and some norepinephrine from the adrenal medulla. So nervous tissue responds to a change and stimulates the endocrine gland to secrete hormone. Yeah, that's it. So nervous tissue, the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system gets activated, and it then tells electrically the adrenal medulla to start making epinephrine. All right? So now, the rest of the chapter really looks specifically at the gland. So I'm going to stop this recording here and pick this up in another recording.